Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio no pictures live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about how the globalists use the patronage machine, effectively corruption and effectively bribery, how they use the patronage machine to keep control of the key people in the political and public service and other sort of social engineering type establishments, whether it be academia or cultural situations like museums and so on. So I just want to talk about this more widely and illustrate and give some examples of it. Now, as I think I've mentioned before, we know quite a few senior public servants and judges and people like that. So there's one senior public servant who retired after 35 plus 40 years or whatever it was in the public service. He was pretty senior. He's one of the elites, and he noted, we were having over a series of sort of lunches and dinners and get-togethers where he and I might have been sitting next to each other or across the table and so on. He was talking about how when he retired, he was expecting to get some pretty well-paid, prestigious gigs with lavish expense accounts, such as fancy houses in downtown, Paris or something, with servants and maids and cooks and all sorts of things. And the reason that he expected that is his forebears, other people in the public service and people he knew. As soon as they retired, they were buried under various offers by groups such as the United Nations or cashed up NGOs or international Quango type outfits, and they were being given, one of them was given a job as some sort of administrator in the International Court of Justice, for example. It was a bullshit token job. I mean, they don't necessarily have to do anything. They make a few press releases here and there, but that's all scripted for them. They effectively just lead a life of, relative luxury. Now, the pay wasn't massive for this job, but they get an all expenses covered palace to live in with, again, maids and servants and so on, chauffeur-driven vehicles. And they can travel around Europe and elsewhere, anywhere they want, all on the expense account. And they're not staying in, trailer parks or something. We're talking 6-star accommodation. They also get invited to make speeches and give educational tours on some of the most lavish cruises in the the 6-star cruises that would bankrupt most people for going. But these folks get some very lavish gigs there. So we've got a situation where they retire into comfort, into prestige, into very, very comfortable situations. So he reasonably presumed, given again of the amount of people he knew that were getting this, so he figured that he would get buried. The phone would be ringing as soon as he retired, that he would be considering all these juicy offers of gigs. Now, anyway, this was a year and a half ago, I suppose. And so he retired and confidently asserted, any day now I'll get a phone call. He didn't get one. I mean, not a single phone call. But people he knew were being offered some really fantastic gigs. One was offered in the United Nations as some trade guru. Now, this person knew absolutely nothing about trade, by the way, and could, but some trade guru. So they were again given some. I think it was in Paris or I don't know, one of the Western European cities, and this guy went to visit them, and they had this palace with being waited on hand and foot, and living a very prestigious lifestyle. People were referred as Mr. Ambassador and all very, very prestigious. So anyway, he didn't get any of these calls. He didn't, and not one. And he was put into the humiliating position, as he saw it at least, of having to call people up and say, listen, is there something for me to do? You know, do you have a prestigious gig you can slip me into? And nobody was biting, and nobody was interested, and so on. Now, why was that? So this guy, again, a senior public servant, he had a number of the globalist credentials. You know, Orange Man bad. The 2016 election of Trump was probably Russian, you know, interference, whereas the election of Joe Biden, who could barely string a sentence together and didn't campaign, that was 100% legitimate. I mean, wow, what a great guy Biden was. Fantastic policies. What were these policies? Oh, I don't know. So he was on board with, I would say, a lot of the trappings, at least, of globalization and the globalist project. He was also looking down on you know, the people who vote for Trump. They're just working class Nazis. They're just, you know, they're just knuckle dragging Neanderthal Nazis. So he was saying all the right things, but the reality, or you know, in the wider scheme of things, this guy was a Christian, and was you could see the signs of Christian charity and so on in his views, and he also believed that, as in the public service, that he actually was a servant of the public. He was there to equally and without fear or favour or prejudice provide services to all citizens. He believed that Australians should come first and things like that. So he resisted for example, in the department he was in control, he wouldn't have any of this anti-white propaganda. He wouldn't have that the you know, white people are a rapist, fascist. Now, yeah, he just wouldn't have that. So really, he was somewhat on board with the globalist project, but not fully on board. And the Christian charitable sort of views would have really, I think, rankled with the pro. Now, I sort of seen him a few times around his colleagues, you know, his public service colleagues and so on, and you could tell that they perceived his views as somehow unsound. He just wasn't really 100% reliable, and that reliability being that he was 100% on board with every manifestation of the globalist project, which includes crushing and shaming and guilting and blaming white people for everything. You know, he wasn't on board with the slavery thing. He wasn't convinced that George Floyd was murdered, you know, and these sort of things. So he wasn't a supporter of Black Lives Matter. He thought they were a bunch of ruffians and so on. So anyway, he wasn't really a fully fledged globalist. So as a result, when he and again, he was sympathetic to really most of the globalization thing, but when he was retired and he was looking for one of these prestigious gift gigs that he gifted to good little globalists, they weren't coming his way. He wasn't to be rewarded. No rewards for him. And this really, I would go as far to say it crushed him. No, I never thought much of it. I liked him, and I admired that his Christian charity sort of kept its place, even in spite of being in a job that would have put him under a lot of pressure to go with the globalist mantra. But he never struck me as a particularly bright guy, or, you know, I don't know. He just didn't impress me at all. I don't think he should have had that job. But nor did he. For the first time, I remember the first time when I saw all these public servants together, including him. And I wouldn't have employed any of them. None of them were impressive people. None of them. And I thought, holy fuck, these are the people that are getting paid, you know, $500,000, $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 a year, with and then retiring into these prestigious gift gigs from the United Nations and so on. So he was he wasn't being rewarded. Now, whether he actively resisted the controls the globalists want to put on him, or did somebody come to him and say, look, buddy, we want you to put in a program of saying all white people are Nazis, slaver, fascist, rapist, we want you to put that in. And he said, no. Well, fuck you, buddy. You're no gift to the United Nations for you when you retire. Was it that direct, or was it a more passive approach? But whatever it was, people who, these other people who've retired before and since are all getting these fancy gigs, but not him. And this has cut him fairly deep. He's almost in a state of permanent depression these days because he thought all this would get. And again, he's gone out and made the phone calls and crawled and begged and grovelled for gigs, and they still won't piss on him. So this has hurt him very much. Anyway, that's the. So I wanted to sort of just make a point of this, that the globalists control all the patronage gigs, all the big money pretty much all the big money patronage gigs are controlled by the globalist machine. Whether it's making your president of the museum, or president of the art gallery, or a trade ambassador, or whatever, it's all controlled by the globalist machine. So if you want any of these well-paid prestigious gigs, I want to give you this idea, the expense account, whereas the pay isn't huge, but the expense account for some of these jobs, it's close to $1 million a year. That's just the expense account. And you get to live again in a lavish residence and all this sort of stuff. So, and the pay you get, whilst not huge, is often tax-free. So you've got no living expenses at all. You can put that money in the bank if you want. But and these are people who are still, say, in their early to mid 60s and in good health. So they've got a few years to go. And some of them spend quite freely when they're in these lavish gigs. But really, you're not going to get the gig unless you do what the globalists want you to do. And so if they come along and say, do an internal training program for the staff to tell them how to decolonize white people and all this sort of stuff, then you have to do that. If what you so there's high, absolutely. On steroids, levels of extortion and bribery and inducement that go on here, and the globalists again control all this. So patronage is a very critical part of the control that the globalists exercise over the political, cultural elite and public service class. Now, I just want to sort of talk about this on a personal level. This guy's a pretty committed globalist. He was CEO of I'm going back some years now, but he's CEO of a company, and he'd been gifted the gig. He wasn't qualified for it in any way, but he'd been gifted the gig. I knew him. He'd been a former work colleague, quite a bit junior to me, and he sort of jumped 10 rungs on the ladder in one move. And again, it was a very much a globalist machine type organization, and they figured so that he was drunk on power and that sort of stuff, but he was technically incapable of doing some of the work. And so he came to me and said, look, I need an EVP who actually knows what they're doing. I'd like to offer the job. I'm simplifying it, but I'd like to offer the job to you, he says. So now, you're always very flattered in a way when you get that tap on the shoulder, but the reality, well, I looked at him and I thought, gee, I couldn't imagine working for you. You're just too flaky and flunky. You're a junior. You haven't got the job on any sort of merit. So I was, not particularly interested. But then he sort of mentioned the salary. I thought, wow, this is a pretty big salary. So he drew up an employment contract, took me out for a nice lunch, and said, well, this is it. Are you happy with this? And so anyway, I thought, okay, well, I'd be silly to walk away from this sort of money. So it was all signed, and he signed it and I signed it. So there was the employment contract. And then the day before I was supposed to start, or a couple of days before I was supposed to start, he called me up and he said, look, we need to negotiate your employment terms, the terms of your contract. And I I said, well, I was a bit surprised. What are you talking about? We already have a contract, and you've signed, and I've signed it, and the terms and conditions and the whatnot and the stipulations are all in the contract. I don't really care about that. He says, you have to come in and you have to negotiate. We have to negotiate this, and you have to come in with. So again, I said, but it's already in the contract. Yeah. No, it's not. We had to negotiate other things. What other things? I can't tell you over the phone. Now, whenever you hear that phrase, I can't tell you over the phone, you know you're having to do with bullshit. You just know it. It's coming. So anyway, I turned up, and his, the office wasn't that far away. So I turned up, and we had and he started. I mean, I struggled to understand where he was coming from. He said, I just want to negotiate everything with you. So, okay, well, what do you want? Oh, negotiate. Well, what do you mean negotiate? And, just negotiate. And I just had no idea what he was talking about. So I said, look, and I had a copy of the contract with me. So I showed him, look, everything's in here. And just grabbed the contract out of my hand, tore it up and threw it in the trash can. I was, well... I remember I was, whoa, what's going on here? I was quite taken aback. And fuck the contract, he says. And so, look, you're a bit slow on the uptake, Billy Bob. Let me spell it out for you. I want you to know that I control every benefit you will receive, every sign off on your expense account, every performance bonus, every whatever. Everything comes from me, comes from my whim. I arbitrarily give you what I want to give you whenever I want to give it to you. That's the situation here. So nothing is in writing. Everything is how I feel on the day. So you have to make sure I feel good about you. Otherwise, you'll get nothing. And so I was staring at him sort of gobsmacked, and realized that because he was a little flunky boy who was himself being controlled, these were the terms and conditions they'd given him. They'd offered him this sort of prestigious, you'll be a CEO, you'll be a big man, you'll be a big tough guy, but bear in mind, you can't shit unless we say so, and everything you get is what we say you can have. And that was the conditions that he'd been employed under. Now, it's a little bit different because he was totally unqualified for the role. The difference being I was fully qualified for the role that was being put in front of me. So there's a slight difference. I think when you are fully qualified and capable of the role, and meeting all the requirements of it, that you can't be employed or awarded under arbitrary conditions and whimsical conditions. That's my view, at least. Whereas if you're not qualified and you're being given the job as a bit of patronage and a gift because they just want a little flunky stooge boy, that's different. You know that you're not capable of doing that job. You know that you would never get that sort of job unless you agreed to those conditions of control or arbitrary control and arbitrary reward. Not the rewards can't be rich if you do as you're told, but if you don't, they'll get rid of you. But if you don't, like they got rid of Liz Truss in the United Kingdom. But if you don't, they'll don't do as you're told, that you won't get the rewards either, or they'll punish you, sort of try and withhold rewards from you, or so on. So I asked for sort of some. Can you give me some examples? He said, well, look, typically executives at your level will stay at 5-star hotels and travel first class on air travel, but I can make it so you travel cattle class and you stay in 3-star hotels. I can make it so that you can't use the hotel laundry services because they always are quite expensive. You can't use the hotel. I can make it so you can't use anything that's in the bar fridge in the rooms. I can make it so that if you have to hire a car to drive around, this is international traveling. If you have to hire a car, or interstate traveling, if you have to hire a car, that you get the smallest 4-cylinder car and a stick shift, or a manual transmission, stick shift. I can make it so that your expense account always gets held up in accounts, so that you don't get reimbursed for 90 days. I can do all of these things. Now, all these things are punishment things rather than reward things. So I thought, well, I'll let this play out because I want to hear how far it goes here. So he only talked about punishment things. He did mention that he could say, in fact, there's nothing that he said that wasn't a punishment factor. For example, say the bonus, I'll simplify this, but say the quarterly bonus, sometimes it can be quite big. Say in this instance, you have a quarterly bonus of $40,000 to $50,000, so it's not a trifling sum. And if you get that 4 times a year, you can easily double your income. So he said something along the lines of, well, I can include or not include certain product categories in the calculation of the bonus. So unless you meet a certain threshold, you get no bonus. But if I arbitrarily decide to add in the chocolate bars and the licorice bars, I'm making a simple little analogy there, but if I say those can be added in, then you will get your $50,000 quarterly bonus. But if I say those things are not included, which I can arbitrarily and whimsically do, that means your bonus would be 0. So anyway, this is endless threats. And he said, I want you to know that everything you receive, everything you get is not part of a contract. It's arbitrarily up to me. So you have to make sure that you're groveling and crawling to me and you're doing exactly what I want. That when I say shit, you say how much and what color. And I want you to know that you are my little flunky stooge boy. You are a fetch and carry little flunky, and in my eyes, nothing more than that. And you'll only be rewarded if I say so, and if I agree, and if I feel like it on the day. So I was aghast by this. Well, you're not going to get any sort of capable people working here if that's your attitude. You'll only get flunkies that can the highest sort of status they can ever get is to be the supervisor in a parking lot or something, or supervising a floor sweeping crew. That's the people who can only ever aspire to that and go nothing beyond it. Then they're the ones that would respond to that sort of tyrannical behavior. Professional people won't. But yet this is the level of control that he wanted and that he thought he needed. And I was trying to discover why he thought he needed that type of control. But the idea is that, or the view that he had and the globalists have, is that only when we have complete arbitrary control of everybody that we need to use, again, whether it's president of the museum or the prime minister or the whatever it is, the editor in the newsroom, only when we have complete arbitrary control, and these people do whatever we want when we say it, and that we can instantly punish them financially and otherwise if they don't do what we want, and they know that we can hold these penalties and inducements over their head like a sword of Damocles, only when they fully understand that we own them inside and out, are we comfortable in having them in these positions. So, and this was the view that he took, and it is a conversation like that and a situation like that the globalists use to control the flunkies and stooges. But they have to put people like AOC or whatever, or Biden or Kamala, it doesn't matter. But you'll notice the quality of the people at the the top of the the political sort of landscape. The quality is very, very low, and with some exceptions, but very, very low. And this is how they get these people into the roles and control them. So I remember this guy, as we were sitting there talking, back to this thing. He worked himself up into a bit of a frenzy because he thought it was an incredible achievement that he was really laying down the law to me. He was telling me, I'll make sure you get nothing unless you do what I say. And now, again, I let this thing play out, and I think my silence in seeing how far it would go and just really egging him on a little bit because I wanted to see just how much of a fucking tyrant this dude is and how delusional he was. Now, he didn't need to control, being a professional, I know that you do as you're told, you follow instructions. Yeah. So, you don't have to threaten people like that. They know how the system works. But he's a flunky. He doesn't know how the system works. So he assumes only threat and accusation and that sort of thing is going to work. And again, holding the sword of Damocles over your head. So, at the end of it, when he'd run out of sort of things to say, I said, "Look, I don't think this is really going to work. If this so he suddenly realised that his play hadn't worked out. So he jumped up and he said, "You're not suitable for this role anyway." So he had to the last one. You pathetic little fucking idiot. But anyway, that was that. So I probably could have sued them over the breach of contract, but I mean, it wasn't worth it. Go off and do something else. But this is how the globalists are controlled. So if this public servant guy that I know, if he'd been a good little flunky boy for the globalists, he'd be right now sitting in a lavish sort of thing. And the impression I get from the conversation I had with him is his regret isn't sticking to his principles or isn't pushing back against some of the more overt madness of the globalization propaganda project. His regret is not having gone along with it and not having got the cozy sort of deal. And and there's sort of his wife and his children had really got on board with the thing. His wife was convinced that he was going to get one of these lavish, fancy gigs in Europe somewhere, and she'd be swanning around Paris or fucking Amsterdam or something like that, and would be getting all sorts of accolades from the local sort of cultural establishments and things like that. So she's rather, I go as far to say, is bitter actually that these things haven't come their way, and so his wife and children are chastising him for, well, we wanted something, we wanted to get our snouts in the trough. So it just shows how powerful the patronage machine is. And when you're stacking the whole political establishment and public service establishment with just two-bit flunkies that couldn't get jobs anywhere else in the real world, in a properly skills competitive-based world, then they're willing to do anything to get their hands on these goodies because they know that they're not entitled to them. You've been a Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for listening.